Happy Friday, everyone.
Yay, happy Friday. How's it going?
It's going great. It was kind of a long week. I'm glad it's Friday.
Yeah. I know you get busy.
Yeah, it goes in waves, right? So busy is good. It's just, yes,
Ready for the
a little
weekend?
crazy this week. Yes, I'm looking forward to it. How
And
about
me
you?
too. Me too. I'm ready for the weekend. It's been a good week, a busy week. I produced a lot of content. I have a few new articles coming up on Tech Target. Love the people at Tech
Yeah,
Target.
cool.
Love writing for them and love the feedback I get from the Tech Target reading community. So happy about that. Um,
Yay.
and I saw an announcement on Twitter yesterday that I'm very interested in. Zoom has announced they have a new Zoom events platform.
Woo.
Zoom's one of our sponsors, so I thought I'd give them a little shout out. I'm pretty excited about this because I've been producing a lot of events over the last year, and the platforms that are out there, they were really designed to help manage in-person events, like booking
Mhm.
rooms. We've been trying to shoehorn, put in the Zoom link, and make it work, and it's been a
Right.
struggle. So for Zoom to have its own thing where the Zoom links will just be in there, and you could just kind of I think it's going to be hopefully it'll be make things a lot easier for me and people like me. So just wanted to give Zoom a shout out there, and
Woo.
let me explain where I met our guests. Speaking of
I
events,
would love to.
one of our favorite events, and maybe the biggest event, at least in the UC visual collaboration industry, is InfoComm. InfoComm is run by the AVIXA organization, and they do a lot of things other than just that one event. And one thing is they do a lot of research and compile a lot of reports on our industry. And Peter and Sean, let me bring them up here. There we go. I think, let me see.
Thanks for
Here
coming,
is
guys.
Sean, and there is Peter. They gave me this briefing on this report, which is available, and it really blew my mind. There was a lot to learn, so I thought that maybe they could join us. And happy Friday, guys! Good to
Same
see
to
you.
you.
And can you guys, did I get it right? Let me explain a little bit about your roles in AVIXA and what you're doing and what this report is about.
Absolutely, yeah. So Sean Wargo, Senior Director over at AVIXA. We do produce a lot of research in addition to our trade shows. I think the point of that, like the trade show does somewhat itself, is to tell the story of the industry. We are all in Pro AV. We're wondering, where are the opportunities for growth? What's going on? Is this market? There are integrators that we work with that are members of our, maybe seeking funding to grow operations, and they need data. So we've always done some industry sizing data. But we kind of took a new look at that a few years back, created a series we call the Industry Outlook Trends Analysis. And that's what we now refresh every single year to kind of tell the story of what's going on in the industry. So my side of it is looking more at the trends itself, the kind of what's happening in the space, what are we seeing from a product, solution, vertical market perspective. But we also have Peter on staff who's looking at the economic side and helping us understand the context in which Pro AV exists. So Peter, I guess a little bit about yourself, how you're fitting in as well.
Hey, everybody. Yeah, Peter Hansen, economic analyst here at AVIXA. So Sean alluded to, my job is to think about the economics of AV. And so the way that works, with our industry being so diverse, so stretched across like new construction, renovation, repair, so many different vertical markets, here we are, live events, that's Pro AV. This is communications platform with Zoom, Pro AV. Of course, sports, offices, government, military. The result is that our industry reflects the wide economy in a lot of different ways. And then sort of, so that's where we get from like IOTA, to get to good numbers about our industry, you have to start with like a solid foundation of understanding of the wider economy. And that sort of foundational understanding is where I come in.
It definitely seemed that for the presentation that you gave me, it's the real world kept coming up. I mean, obviously the pandemic was a massive factor in just every aspect of the report, every aspect of our lives. So it's an interesting combination of big trends. We're saying going back to the office, what is that going to be like? How is that going to affect? And kind of what we're expecting from a report of this, pandemic aside, looking at historical trends and seeing what we expect to be sold in the marketplace. It's kind of hard to what you're managing to do is, yes, we're starting over from scratch, but no, we're not starting over from scratch. We're doing it the way we've always done it, but all the numbers changed last year. I mean,
yeah, for sure. I mean, the historical precedent is important. We've been through pandemics before. Pro AV was a very different animal back in 1918, what there was, if any at all. But the idea, though, that Peter, has been looking at as part of our analysis is, well, what is our normal state? How do we tend to want to be as humans? How do we act in our world? What kinds of things are we used to, comfortable with, prefer, all that sort of stuff? And so while pandemics and other economic, say, black swan events are disruptive, we do have a tendency to return to some of that more normal behavior. We change in the process for sure. And our industry is clearly changing along with it. But it is really, the difficult period is right when things are happening. How bad is it going to be? It's hard to see that because you're just not sure how long it's going to last. Previous viral waves or viruses that hit us, like SARS, were shorter lived. So there's optimism times. But we did take a stand last year. We did a forecast. We predicted a certain percent decline for AV in 2020. And it ended up being a lot worse than we thought. The good news of that is there's a lot of growth opportunity as we come out, but it was a very real, for Peter and I, kind of watching it as it was unfolding, kind of looking at the data, talking to our members, it becomes very real and very human, because you're seeing companies going through difficult time. You're seeing companies shuttering their doors, they're laying off staff. But that's part of the process that we look at to kind of see how is this going to shape as we come out. And how do we reemerge like a phoenix, growing and becoming something new and impressive out of this?
Yeah, I guess it's we could look at all the numbers were down, but that's just opportunity. They weren't down because we don't like to do those things anymore. I mean, events. At some point, Kelly, I got to show you this report. It was, you'd expect every business had a 4% decrease, an 8% decrease, 10%. In-person events had like a 50% decrease. It was just a reality, but that doesn't mean that, that's the future. That means that we can grow then, and then beyond that. Even going back to hardware, let's go to our boardroom. I love our little boardroom. There we go. I think this is we're a little bit more cozy here, and this is what we do. We build rooms like this. This is what our industry is about. It's when you go to Infocom. It's people who make the monitors, it's people who make the headsets, it's people who make the room acoustics, and it's the people who hang them up. I almost feel like it's insulting to say hang them up because there's so much more involved than just hanging it up. I mean, these people are engineers, but it's installing them correctly and making it work and everything else involved. This is our world, and for the last year, we haven't been allowed to do this. We've been doing it virtually like we're doing it now. So. I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, so can you guys give us kind of the high level, what the report says?
Sure, yeah.
For someone that didn't get to see it.
Yeah, understood. Well, I think where we started is a good place to kind of focus in on how do we set the context. So yeah, Peter, tell us a little bit about kind of the economy and what that was looking like, because we, as you guys noted, we tend to mirror that to some extent. And then from there, we paint the picture of how are we a little bit different and how do we kind of impact on that. But GDP is a big part of this story as we look at it.
Yeah. So can we usually try to start at the GDP Foundation, which last year, 2020, dropped about 3 or 4% globally. Now, as we just were talking about, AV, for the most part, while there's a lot of virtual connectivity, it's an in-person technology, right? Like live events is so important, cinema, sports, even like for the Pro AV, like a lot of the technology that some of people are using for this is a little bit more on the consumer side of Pro AV. So our industry underperformed GDP much more than we would anticipate typically. But the sort of like overall GDP movements that you see regionally are reflected in Pro AV. So like Asia Pacific was the kind of the strongest performer last year GDP wise, and also for Pro AV. The Americas in the middle of the pack GDP wise, and then EMEA kind of the worst performer, and you see that mapped across the GDP. And now we're seeing this year, 2021, like 6% global GDP growth, and you're gonna see that mapped out to recovery. You know, that GDP recovery and the GDP trend recovery are all mapping to Pro AV. Kind of moving into the sort of what economics is telling us about overall trends. The big lesson all center on COVID-19 in some way. But now it's sort of like a mix of positive and negative. Now the negative is, you know, the Delta variant. The countries and regions that are unvaccinated and are still having, you know, strong lockdown restrictions, border restrictions, that's disrupting supply, increasing costs, making it harder to run a business, hurting demand still a little bit as well. On the positive side, though, is that we're having a lot of recovery. You know, even though we have the Delta variant now, it's still like relatively safe to be vaccinated. Even if you get it, you know, it's not that severe of an illness. So we're seeing people returning to activities, getting back to in person, and that money reaching AV. And then there's kind of like the mix of that is like spiking demand plus continued issues with border crossings, with lockdowns in certain areas equals supply difficulties, delays, price increases. So that's kind of like, it's a good problem to have. You know, it's much better to have that like struggling to meet demand than like I have no demand. But overall, it's a complex picture right now with some positives from recovery, the negatives of COVID-19 still being a factor, and then some supply challenges as a result of the mix of those.
You know, one thing I thought was really cool about the report, we're talking now about the, you know, general trends in the economy, which of course affect everything in AV, but it also dove deep into the segments of the AV industry itself. And I'm supposed to know this stuff. I'm a video conferencing analyst, a UC analyst, and there were some things in there that really caught me by surprise. There was, and I think this is particularly important for investors. You know, our industry it was growing nicely before the pandemic. Parts of it grew even during the pandemic or because of the pandemic, and it's expected to bounce even bigger. So I think we might get investors, and where do they want to put their money? You know, what's growing the best? Speaking of which, I feel silly now. I should have mentioned the really big Zoom news is they acquired Five9. The Zoom events might be the second big story. I mean, you know, that was a 16 billion something, I don't remember, billions and millions acquisition. And part of it is because Five9's a great company doing a great job, but a big part of it is the addressable market. How much money is there to be made in contact center? So that kind of stuff, I think, for investors is interesting. And what caught me off guard, surprised me, was there was this one page that had these circles, the bubbles, and each bubble was a section of our market. So there was a bubble for video meetings, like we're in now. There was a bubble for streaming, which we're also doing now. You know, there was a bubble for all these chat, for all these different UC segments. And there was a bubble for content management, which is if you're doing internal videos for your company, training videos, where do they get stored? You don't want to put them on YouTube, right? So you store them internally. And Kelly, you know, we see those companies, you know, those companies are, they're great companies. We see them at Infocom. And personally, I walk, and these guys, they heard me tell this story when I briefed with them, so I thought it was so funny. I walk right by their booths, because when we go to Infocom, what do we look at? The 3D displays, the
Cool
drones, the cool stuff. And what do these guys have at their booths? These guys, you know, men and women have at their booths, they have server boxes. Here's the X2000. We had the X1000 last year. It seems so boring. But their bubble was massive. It is a massive, and I'm saying massive on purpose because I usually say something else, but it's a massive part of our industry. It's so important, and Let's Do Video has not been paying enough attention to it. And I don't know if someone inside the industry is making the mistake, someone outside the industry, an investor, someone coming in, I don't think they would be aware of that kind of thing without the support. And that's just, you know, one example, but there's surprises in there, and important surprises.
Well, I mean, we implemented an asset management system when I worked at AVI Systems, and it is very important. And videos are huge. And now that they're, you know, everybody's doing them, right? And the file sizes are giant. And the fact that you can reuse some of it and go back and get the metadata and all this stuff, it's like you have to store them somewhere. But not only do you have to store them, you have to be able to find them. So
Yeah.
I get that.
Yeah, but it seems like the analyst industry has been ignoring it. I mean, you see a lot of articles about that stuff.
Yeah, one thing I just really love this report for is that it really broadens your perspective. That, you know, so many people in our industry, they came up from like a certain part of the industry, or just, you know, when you're the CEO of a company that's big enough, like you may have lots of relationships in the industry, but your company's so big that you just can't know every single part anymore. You know, you know, maybe you know your city, but like you don't know the other important cities in your, and that's where I feel like this report really like provides such an insight for like me as an analyst, is finding stories that I didn't really realize were happening, because we're synthesizing from so many different analysts from so many different regions. We're getting this like overview that you can like come to one spot and see so many different numbers and so many different trends. And then, you know, you can dive deeper from the numbers and use our platform as well for that.
So what is not to give away, sorry, the secret sauce but what is like the biggest surprise that you guys found?
Well, one thing I was going to add on to, which might kind of reveal some of the surprise too, as Peter and David are both sort of talking about this breadth of opportunity for our industry. You know, we're all talking about, we love this word internally, or at least joke about using it too often, pivot, right? So there was tons of that happening during the pandemic with companies that were focused on the great boardroom installations, you know, live events, any sort of in-person experiences. We always talk about AV. Our opportunity as a marketplace is the marriage between content, space, and technology, right? So for the longest period of time, over the last 18 months, really, we've been focused on technology and content, but without the space. The space was home. The space was this, right? It was this kind of Zoom interaction. So I think the surprise is just how much opportunity kind of emerged for our installers, manufacturers, et cetera, the whole Pro AV channel around this kind of remote experience. So being able to shift our operations and our technology focus away from those sexy displays and, you know, great speakers and all the kind of front end technologies that we're used to, the last 2 feet type technologies, more towards the back end. This, as you're talking about, David, or mentioned, the content management hardware, the stuff that allows us to capture content, video like this, optimize it, and then position it back out, distribute it back out through streaming, to reach audiences. Those were areas that we thought there's going to be so much decline in in-person activity and projects for kitting spaces that our market was going to really net decline across the board. And in fact, instead, conference and collaboration, content distribution, streaming, production, all those sorts of things, they actually grew a little bit during the pandemic. So in a period where, as Peter mentioned, you've got 3.3% declines in GDP. So economic output is down. To see growth anywhere is a great thing. Now, that's offset by huge declines like the live events that you talked about, -50, -60% revenues. So our industry certainly bore the brunt, but there were these opportunities, and that was good for us to see. It was a surprise for us to see that it was actually a little better than we had hoped. But it really does tell this story that we're talking about now of there's a lot more to AV than just the front end technology, the displays, speakers, et cetera. There's a lot of back ends. And even more so now that we've gone through the pandemic and realized that there's this opportunity to be focused as AV integrators around content management, content creation, content production, all those sorts of things. AV over IP is perhaps what a lot of people frame as, but that's just one part, right? That's just the vehicle for getting it done. There's so much more. So long story short, it's these kind of peripheral opportunities that are creating growth as we go forward, and is really our way out, and how we're adapting, and I think will grow even more than we expect right now. I'd say our estimates as as big as the growth percent forecasts are, I wouldn't be surprised if we exceed a lot of that, just because I expect innovation to come from this in areas that we hadn't thought. So yeah, that's my vote of confidence in the creativity and innovation that all of us are in this industry. You have to be in this industry to kind of get it done.
Hey, it's nice to hear. It's nice to hear the positivity,
Yes.
and it's not just nice to hear, but I believe it too. I think we're rounding the curve in big terms, and our industry was kind of in a position to help during the pandemic in a lot of ways. So it wasn't as bad for some of us, and you know, you said even some amazingly had a little growth. So yeah, it feels good to be positive and to be able to actually believe in it. Now, we've discussed how this report is valuable to a lot of different people. Obviously, analysts in the industry, or you know, executives in the industry, people looking to come into the industry. Who did you primarily have in mind when you're putting it together? Who do you say, you know, this is the person we're writing this for?
Yeah, it's a good question, because one of the challenges we at AVIXA face, I've had similar roles for other organizations, other associations I've worked for, and the audience, the ultimate member base, was a narrower band. So let's say it was just manufacturers. In Pro AV, we're talking about the whole channel. You're talking about distributors, manufacturers, integrators, live events professionals, the end users, the AV managers at higher ed and corporate types of purchase points. So that's a lot of people. That's a lot of different roles with lots of different needs. I will say, out of that though, where we started was this need to help the manufacturers to supply of technology understand how technology was flowing through the channel ultimately to the end user. So the report, you know, is global, it's big numbers, it's large growth. So it did that if you're a multinational, global manufacturer, supplier, that's going to be of interest to you. Distributors are right up there as well. Maybe a big integration firm who's trying to understand operations across geographies. So that's where we start, but there's utility even for, say, the integrator who's trying to grow or trying to look for new opportunity. I would say even more so now, because the challenge for a smaller integrator is you use the pipeline being, you know, I know people, I've got a great network, business is going well, you know, my contacts are bringing in new business. When you have a disruption like this and the market shifts dramatically, that network can dry up quickly. And so this research now can help people look, even though it's a big picture, it can help people look for those places, spaces, technologies, markets, geographies where growth is better or there's more opportunity. And so I think that's what we're hoping to tell, is reveal those peripheral opportunities that you wouldn't have thought of and now need to in order to kind of emerge faster, healthier, all that sort of stuff out of it. So while the original audience started one way, I think it's shifted through time, and we're Peter and I talk a lot about this, like how do we help the integrator, you know, installers, live events professionals as well, figure out, you know, path forward, opportunity set, diversification plans, those kinds of things. So it's shifted. Yeah.
Yeah, it seems like
at this point, it's sort of like if you're making important strategic decisions, like moving major sums of money, like, you know, for your organization and in some level, I'd recommend it. I'd recommend at least exploring, you know, like maybe the purchase,
right,
you know, whatever, the full access isn't for you,
Right.
but I mean, if you're trying to make a complex decision or an important, you know, about multiple people's jobs or about like where you're investing, you know, planning for next year, like take a look.
It seems like the smaller integration firms have fared significantly better during all of this. Have you guys seen that or no?
I'd say mixed. I think it depends on
Yeah.
area of focus. So smaller, you would expect agility, right?
Mhm.
And so in these sort of disruptive periods, agility is king. You know, that your ability to pivot. There we go again.
Right.
But diversify, find new opportunity. However, if you are very focused, like let's say I talked to, for example, a smaller live events firm who was focused strictly on live events for
Right.
associations. right? Ooh, gosh, that's a hard area to be in when you're in the pandemic, right?
Yeah.
And just no immediate pipeline, no network, no contacts in other space. So I think you can be right, Kelly. I think it just depends on their focus. On the other hand, a larger firm may have bigger war chest, the ability to
Right.
kind of sustain because they have cash to work with, and sources of capital, larger pipelines, more diversity, but you would expect that they may have to shed some weight as you go through it. So a small firm's small, they can't shed, they close. Whereas a
Right.
big firm contract to reemerge in a different way. But
Interesting.
mixed bag. Yeah.
Yeah, our labor market research actually, I think, really reflects what Sean's saying, that it's not so much a question of size as much as a question of like what spaces are you working in.
Yeah.
We saw in our data collected from our insights community, something like 40% of companies had layoffs and 60% didn't, and that didn't remix after it happened. So of the 60% who had no layoffs, who managed to avoid that, 50% have already added staff beyond where they were. So like all these companies were doing really well.
Wow.
And then of the 40% who had layoffs, only 12% have recovered to like where they were pre-pandemic, and only like a few percent are even beyond. Of that 12%, only like a third of them are beyond where they were.
Which is probably a large chunk of the live event people, right?
Right. So if you were in that live event space, if you were in maybe more like hospitality spaces, right? Like it doesn't matter what size you are, like the dollars aren't there. But if you are in conference and collaboration, you're working with maybe education, especially their communication solutions, and like, yeah, you're probably one of those companies who's even gone beyond where you were pre-pandemic.
Interesting. I guess it makes sense.
I definitely think there's something to the small company thing. It seemed like with integrators, I saw some of this, and it might be anecdotal, but I remember seeing some smaller integrators who had new live streaming offerings. If your event's canceled, we will help you with your streaming. We do streaming production now. They didn't do streaming production before the pandemic. And maybe it was, a little extra revenue that way might help make up for their losses in other areas, whereas a very big integrator, they wouldn't have time to ramp up because they're going to do it in a big way. It would take a year to ramp up a live event production company. So I saw innovation pivoting. I do like that word. And it makes sense. I think it's easier to pivot when you're small. So I saw that kind of creative, fun stuff coming from the smaller ones. But as far as whether that helped them weather the storm, in big from a big picture, I don't know.
Yeah, I think I work with a lot of smaller integrators, but none of them were super heavy on the production side. So I'm biased, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, the big companies, it's somewhat, what can be somewhat inevitable is the traveling that they may be doing. Like they're starting to get into a certain area. And so as Peter kind of talking about, you may see from the outside a large contraction, but it's a refocus. Whereas the small firm, it may be a little bit more visible because you're talking to the principal who is aware of and kind of working with maybe some of that stuff and helps to realign the company quickly. It is certainly easier to turn a small boat. We all know that. It's classically true of large organizations that the change of direction can be hard and take a while. But I think what Peter and I were even saying prior to pandemic is when business is good, it's easy to say, we're just cranking, we're going to be fine, let's just stay as we are. But the pandemic has proven out, as you're kind of talking about it with your examples, is the more you're kind of looking ahead and saying, I see there's something here. Let's say it's this collision between AV and IE, right? Or a production of content, those kinds of things, seeing that from your crow's nest early on and say, I'm gonna get on this because there's something to it. That experimentation, that innovation is what is going to carry you. So use this period, especially right now. There's a bit of a danger right now of kind of a wait and see, where companies might say, I'm gonna wait for things to get fully back before I make some big moves. But I think what we're hearing, and Peter could talk about this probably for a while, is labor market issues.
Mhm.
And what we're going to see is, and already are seeing, talent is becoming harder and harder to come by. I'm hearing this in a lot of trade industry, particularly where they're ready to expand. They've got consumer demand for, let's say it's HVAC or plumbing or something, and you just can't find anyone, right? And I think that's not far away for AV if we're not already there. So
Where are
there's
they?
some. Where are the people? The
Yeah,
workers?
where are the people?
Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, because my friend Steve and I are teaching a class at Infocom on recruitment and retention and stuff. And it's like, I keep hearing it all over the board. We can't find people. Did they just leave the industry? Did they quit their jobs and decide not to come to work anymore? I mean, where are these people?
Yeah, one big part is that the labor market participation rate, which is like the percent of like the working age population that's actually either looking for a job or has a job, that's way lower right now.
Yeah.
And honestly, one of the big reasons is parenting. That, right, when schools are remote,
Interesting.
like, can you afford to be a 2-parent like working household? Like, that's difficult. I have family friends who are, lost a job or left a job and like is taking care of the kids and is now looking to get back in the workforce. I think as well, people who are just in general anxious about COVID-19. This actually in June, we saw when the June numbers came out at the beginning of July for the United States. And we saw something kind of interesting. We saw hundreds of thousands of jobs added, but the unemployment rate ticked up, which is like, how is that possible? We had like tons and tons and tons. It was a great month for adding jobs, and then unemployment went up. And that was that we're starting to see that easing of people getting back into the labor market. But it's a substantial percent of the market that is out of the labor market for many reasons, parenting being one of them. But I think things like anxiety, like if you're close to retirement, you're like, look, it's not worth it for me to work in person right now. Like I'll try and launch maybe in the fall. And I think you can see that as well. And the other part, Kelly, that I would mention as well, is it's that dichotomy of like the companies that they never saw a layoff and they've been trying to hire, like they're trying to hire talented communications, UCC installers, like that. There are a lot of them on the market. Right. And then the people who aren't trying to hire, like, and they haven't been hiring, they're the live event space. And if you were in the live event space, maybe you're going back to school a little bit, or you're just like, I'm sitting this out and taking care of my kids. And like maybe in the fall, you'll start to get back there. And that's one thing that's a tip that, Sean was kind of alluding to earlier, like that we've given is sort of, if you're in a space that is recovering soon, like maybe hire like 2 months or a month or two earlier than you think, like you're seeing the revenue ramp back up, like hire ahead, because there's a point where it's going to be really challenging. Like you're going to have to fight at some point to get a live events professional on staff. And if you hire now, like, okay, maybe you'll lose a little bit money in August, but you'll save money in like December, in January, when you brought in a really talented, experienced live events professional who hit the ground running at a reasonable salary, and your business is working well, and you're not trying to hire kind of scraping the bottom of the barrel, or let's say like having to like hire away from a competitor, which is much more expensive, so on.
So interesting. It's like, prior to the pandemic, there was just such a huge talent shortage, and then all of a sudden it was like, everyone's looking for a job. And then all of a sudden, like overnight, it's like it just keeps going all over the place. It doesn't seem to, it's so strange.
Yeah. Their numbers do show that it is easier to hire now. Like on average, most people are saying it's easier than it was before the pandemic, but it's not like, when you look at, we're like, the overall economy, something like 8 million jobs below what it was pre-pandemic, like 7 or 8 right now. And that's even more if you kind of like look at the population trends, right? But the difference in difficulty in hiring is like, it's way more marginal than you'd expect based on that employment, kind of those overall big numbers.
I kind of think that's good. It's not a great thing. I like the idea of being towards that end of the spectrum, though, because that means workers get appreciated more. I don't like workers getting taken for granted and not being paid well, and I don't want companies to go out of business because they can't find people to work. But I like the idea of it was hard to get this person. We better treat him or her very well.
Yeah. Yeah, I would agree with you. I mean, real wage data would back that up too. We had gone through a period where real wage, the actual, once you could control for inflation and all that sort of stuff, was flat-ish for a long, long period of time, I think. So yes, maybe we're talking about, I think, Peter, in one of your latest reports, you're talking about how, we're starting to see some of that where earnings and salaries are starting to meaningfully increase. And so I would agree with you that, it's good to see a time where, the worker, the AV integrator, the technician, all those sorts of things become valued even more. But the key to that story is going to be skills too, because we did go through a disruptive period where skill needs were changing. And so that may be a part of it too, Kelly, as you're kind of talking about, is where are the people? Well, where are the people with the right skill? Remember that a lot of our work was built up in a certain area, a certain way.
Right.
And so that's shifting a bit. Part of it is the market, labor market, the talent market adjusting, kind of thinking through what are the new skills that I need. I am interested in early retirement. I'm hearing some buzz about that there are some people leaving workforce because they've decided, you know what, I'm kind of done. Randy Klein from Crestron is maybe an example of like, okay, been in the industry a while, might be time to do something else. So especially given
heard that a lot, actually.
Life being re-examined. Yeah.
And the market being good, you're saving, some people's savings accounts looking pretty nice right now, mostly.
Must be nice.
But no vacations.
401ks.
401ks. Yeah. One thing about salary we saw in the year before the pandemic, we saw like pretty solid salary increases. And then last year, with our most recent salary survey data, respondents told us not that salaries went down. They just reported their raises were only 40% of what we got the year before, and that was for the U.S. That was for non-U.S. countries, both high GDP and low GDP. It was just across the board. It was a fraction of what raises were before, and I wouldn't be surprised if that's kind of affecting the labor market a little bit. Businesses maybe getting a little sticker shock that like, oh, we're getting some rebound in those wages. Like, I didn't give a lot of raises last year. The AV industry did it, right? So when you're trying to go back to the market and say, I want to hire, you aren't realizing like, oh, it's coming back to normal. You're like 2021 is having a more normal salary growth year, and I gotta bump up a couple more thousand than I realized. I sort of like stalled out, and that made sense maybe in 2020 to some extent with the market where it was. But now that we're ramping back up, especially in the United States, I think companies maybe they're struggling to hire because they maybe haven't fully realized what's happening with wage markets. We'll have to see in the 2022 compensation report what exactly happened, but that's a suspicion I have.
Makes sense. So where can our viewers find out more about this report and get a copy? I'll be sure to put a link in the description below the video after it, but
awesome. Yes. Our website, AVIXA.org, on the market intelligence pages has a good amount of information just about IOTA and some of the other research, macroeconomic trends, market opportunity analysis, vertical market kind of series. So that's a great place to start. Certainly happy to have a conversation with people if they want to reach out. I'm at swargo@avixa.org. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on Twitter. So you can reach me a few different ways, but yeah, love to take questions, have conversation, share perspective, because what we love is this starts, people asking, well, hey, my situation's been like this. How are you seeing that in the data? Or it seems different than the data. We like to hear that kind of stuff. It helps us understand the breadth of reality that's out there. But yeah, it's a good place to start is the site, just to get some bit of background on what we have.
Yeah, I mean, this kind of data can be so valuable, and it's there and it's available. It's definitely worth at least looking into, I think. Kelly, any questions
Cool.
I forgot? Or ready to call it a
No,
Friday?
I think so.
Do you have a final thought for us?
I do.
All right, here we go. Zooming in from space. Uh-oh, is our video frozen?
Oh, no.
Oh, here we go.
Oh, there I am.
At the top of Mountain Wisdom.
All
Guru
right.
Kelly.
So my final thought of the day is another weird, wacky fact that did you know it's physically impossible to lick your elbow? Physically impossible. Unless you have an insanely long tongue or a very short arm.
I was gonna say a very short arm. Or something went very wrong somewhere.
I will leave you with that today, guys. Have a
you.
happy Friday, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, our guests, for joining us. Thank you, our viewers, for watching, and we will see you next week.